So, you remember the headlines, right? The crisis in the Strait of Hormuz. It really looked like a showdown with Iran was about to happen. But what if that whole thing was a diversion? We're going to dig into a really fascinating analysis today that says the real fight wasn't with Tehran at all. It was with someone much closer and a lot more powerful. And look, the official line was crystal clear. The president came out and framed this as a direct threat from Iran. Simple as that. It set the stage for this massive high-stakes showdown that could have had huge consequences for, well, everybody. And, for a few days there, it really felt like it was all about to go down. The world's most critical oil lane was basically shut off. The threat of economic chaos, it felt very real. That was the story everyone, and I mean everyone, was watching. Okay, but this is where the whole story just takes a complete turn into something else. The analysis we're looking at today asks a really important question. What if that whole public crisis with Iran, what if it was just a smokescreen, a cover for a hidden economic war against someone totally different? So to really get this theory, you have to go back to the one thing that kicked this all off. This didn't start with a missile or a drone. Nope. It started with an insurance policy. You heard that right. Lloyd's of London, a total giant of global finance, they suddenly suspend war risk insurance for tankers in the Strait. And you got to understand, without that insurance, those ships just don't sail. The effect was instant. It was crippling. But then, just as fast as it started, Lloyd's did a complete 180.
So the analysis we're digging into here says, hold on a second. This wasn't just some smart business move. No way. It was a calculated attack. It was designed to cause the most economic and political damage possible to the administration, all to create just total chaos.
But here's the thing, that chaos, it never really happened. And according to this source, that's because there was a three-part countermove that just completely blew up the whole plan.
Okay, so check this out. First, the US government says, fine, we'll offer our own insurance, which totally cancels out what Lloyd's did. Then the Navy steps up and guarantees safe passage for all ships. But it's this third move that this analysis calls the real masterstroke. The White House lifts some sanctions on Russian oil and then immediately gets on the phone with Putin. Nobody saw that coming. A total pivot.
So you gotta ask, right? If the response involves Russia and a direct challenge to a huge London financial institution, was Iran really the only player here? And that question gets us right to the heart of what this whole analysis is claiming.
And this is where the theory really gets wild. The source is arguing that these actions weren't just defensive. They were an offensive move, designed to expose a secret financial link between two countries that are supposed to be enemies.
So, according to this analysis, the real target of the White House's counterattack was Great Britain. The whole Russia thing, even the offers to protect oil for China, it was all designed to put London in a box, to isolate them completely. And this wasn't something you had to read between the lines to get. The source points to a really stark change in the language being used, saying this quote is basically an open declaration that the special relationship was, well, over. Okay, so what's the proof for a claim that big? Well, the source says the key to the whole thing was hiding in plain sight in a Bloomberg investigation that had come out months before. And this kind of lays out the alleged connection perfectly. That Bloomberg story, it traced the money of Iran's ruling family. And it didn't lead to Tehran. It led to shell companies in places like the Isle of Man. And the source argues these aren't just random islands. They're critical parts of the City of London's offshore network, this huge web of territories, all financially tied back to London banks. This basically forces you to rethink the last, 47 years of history? The source calls it a management arrangement. The idea is that the whole death to the West stuff from the mullahs was just for show. It was a performance. And while they were doing that, behind the curtain, London was quietly managing their family's money. That is a truly wild claim. And the fallout from all this wasn't just about money. According to this analysis, it also pushed aside the key political players who supposedly kept this old system running. Two big names get called out as being left on the outside looking in. John Bolton, the quintessential foreign policy hawk, and Mark Carney, who was running the Bank of England at the time, a huge player in London's financial scene. The argument here is that the guys who built the old world order were suddenly locked out. And what's fascinating is the source uses Bolton's own words against him, basically. His complaint isn't really about what happened. It's about the lack of process. And the source says, yeah, exactly. It's that same process that gave us decades of these managed, never-ending conflicts, just like the one with Iran. And then you get this really sharp contrast with the viewpoint of someone like Pete Hegseth. In this analysis, he represents the soldiers who actually had to pay the price for that process. The message couldn't be clearer. The generation that fought those forever wars has no intention of doing it again. So what you're really seeing is a clash of two totally different ways of looking at the world. You have the old system, which is all about managing chaos forever, and this new vision, which is just laser-focused on one thing, the outcome for America.
All of this is building up to the source's final point, that what we're watching here is the beginning of a totally new way of doing foreign policy.
And they're very specific about what that means. They don't call it an imperial policy, which is about managing a global system. They call it an American policy, which is all about ending conflicts decisively in a way that directly benefits the U.S.
And that brings us right back to where we started. Why did Lloyd's of London blink? In this view, it wasn't some simple policy reversal. It was a surrender. They folded because they realized the other side wasn't playing by the old rulebook anymore and was perfectly willing to tear the whole system down.
So, that leaves us with one big, provocative question. Was this just a blip on the radar, a temporary disruption? Or are we watching a fundamental challenge to a global financial order that has been quietly running things for decades? According to this analysis, the game has totally changed. And whether you buy into it or not, the implications are just impossible to ignore.